We'll get it at some point. We're going to get it. We're going to make it smooth. Okay.
Oh,
Here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good early morning, depending on where you are.
Afternoon.
I know.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe we'll
Jens
have
is probably in
Jens
the
is going to
chat.
be here
Yeah,
afternoon
he's
on the other side of
afternoon for him.
the ocean. All right. Well, if you're here for the first time, I'm Kristin Bowen. I've got Todd here. This is the best hour of the day coach development podcast, and we're here live every Thursday, same time, same place, talking all things coaching. So today we have returning to the show, former seminar staff member, owner of multiple affiliates, retired U.S. Navy, expert on adaptive coaching. So executive director, I think, president of the Adaptive Training Academy, Mr. Alec Zirkenbach. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for having me again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's 3 p.m. somewhere else. What time is it for you, Alec?
Oh, it's 6 a.m. on the
6
West Coast.
Yeah, so we
good
absolutely
afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. We absolutely appreciate you hitting the alarm early this morning and being on here with us. So
Of course.
we had you on the show. For those of you that were listened and heard the episode, we had Alec on about a month or so ago. And it was cool. We did a deep dive into essentially how to make your space accessible to all, and really, really look at your accessibility and determine, we say the gym is for everybody and anyone can come and anyone's welcome, but are you really creating a space that is accessible for everyone beyond just kind of that standard ADA compliance and all that. So that was super interesting. But today we are going to switch gears a bit and we're going to talk about the actual coaching of our adaptive athletes. So we're going to dive into some scenarios, take questions as always from you guys that are listening. And yeah, so Alec, why don't you give us a rundown of kind of step one. We were talking a little bit about stimulus before we started the call, and just out of the gate, step one, we have to determine what the stimulus of the workout is, which ends up being a little bit different than how we typically would do that on an everyday basis. So can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So today we're going to focus on having that workout of the day that most of our affiliates will have. So if you're the trainer of the day, think, okay, I'm coming to class, I'm looking at the class notes, or I'm coming in, I'm seeing the whiteboard, reading the programmer's notes. Here's the workout of the day. And then you don't even know who's going to come into class. So you may have your regulars that come into your classes, but you don't know who's going to show up. So the idea is that we can prepare you for anybody that comes into your gym to be able to take the workout of the day, identify the stimulus, and then apply that same stimulus to everybody in your class. So this is a concept that's not new, right? We all think this way, that anybody can come in and get the same great workout. It could be an 80-year-old, a 20-year-old, grandma, soccer player, doesn't matter who it is, but we could also include into those categories injured athletes and then our true adaptive athletes as well. So step one to doing this is really understanding the stimulus of the workout as a whole and each component of that workout. And I think a lot of times we as coaches and trainers, we've been taught stimulus. You get that at the level one. You think about it a little bit, but you kind of glaze over it just a little bit. You're like, oh, well, this is a long workout because it's 20 minutes or more. Or, okay, we got some squats in here. So there's some squats, and then it's heavy versus being moderate or light or something like that. But to be a really good coach, you really should dive a little bit deeper into that stimulus. And the more you can dive deeper into that stimulus, the better then you can adapt or modify for anybody in your class that specific stimulus, whether it's the exercise or the workout as a whole, to each individual in your class. That's really what you should be doing, is kind of trying to get deeper there.
And like big picture, how do you think about stimulus? Like, what is the stimulus big picture? You talked about a long workout if it's 20 minutes or squatting. Like, in general, you're describing stimulus. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, the stimulus is the characteristics of that exercise or the components of all of them together that are going to elicit a specific response in the body, physiologically and psychologically, for that trainee for that day. So you can think about it, and this is where we could spend a whole entire YouTube series talking about stimulus, because you can really interpret it any way you want. And you should look at it as can a coach describe to me the workout of the day in one sentence? Like, give me an overall general stimulus of the workout. But then I also want you to be able to describe each movement, each exercise within that workout, and tell me in detail what the stimulus is. So let's look at, like, let's say, give you an example, 7 minutes of burpees. Okay. Right.
Everyone's favorite open workout.
It's literally my least favorite workout of all time. But, and I think it's the hardest workout. I would put that in the top 5 of hardest workouts of all time. But can you describe to me what the overall, just in one quick sentence, what the stimulus of that workout is? 7 minutes of burpees. Like, what would the two of you say?
I look at, when I think about stimulus, in general, I'm like, what is that going to look and feel like for, I'll say, the best or some of the top level athletes at my gym? And so in a workout like that, I'm like, all right, best athletes in my gym, I'm looking for 100 burpees in that. And then probably the window I'm looking for is probably 70 on the bottom end, 110, 120, right? So I'm always thinking about stimulus as, what is it going to look and feel like for the people that can do it as it's written on the board or as it's programmed?
How would you describe it, in addition to how many reps you're trying to get? What would your description be for how the workout's meant to feel?
How is the workout meant to feel? It's meant to feel awful. Alec just said that it's one of the worst workouts of all time.
Well, that's
your official. That's your official way you're going to list the stimulus.
All right, guys, it's supposed to feel awful today.
The worst workouts of all time. Yeah,
I could describe it as like, hey, this is going to be as much of a mental grind as it is going to be a physical grind, right? You've got a workout like that where you're doing the same thing over and over again for 7 minutes. That's physically extremely taxing. It's the farthest range of motion you can simply move your body weight, but it's so redundant for 7 minutes that it becomes, mind numbing. So, you can start diving into some of that stuff. I typically like to keep that in my mind, but not really cover that too detailed in the class. What about you, Kristin? How would you describe the stimulus there?
Yeah, pretty similarly, just with the mental aspect of it. And something like 7 minutes of burpees, it's like, hey, this is not a complex movement at all. You're just getting down on the ground and then getting up and jumping. And so this is one of those workouts that you're going to have to dig deep to keep moving. But I want you guys to try to find a pace that you can maintain for the full 7 minutes and just try to move as much as possible with as little rest as you can. Like, I would probably, and I know that veers into strategy a little bit, but it's such, there's a little crossover there.
I would say that's one of the harder workouts to describe the feel. Like, you can come up with stimulus as far as reps are concerned, but beyond that, it's like, there's other workouts that's a little easier to get into the details of the stimulus and what this should look and feel like, right?
Right. Like, you should be able to do this many reps before you put the weight down or, whatever. So this is a great example. So Alec, passing it back over to you now. This is, broad stimulus, but now we're talking about under the umbrella of the adaptive athlete. What changes for you, if anything?
Yeah. Before I get into what it changes for the adaptive athlete, I think both of you are correct. And the idea with identifying the stimulus is it's very subjective. So there's not one objective truth of the stimulus of a workout, because your programmer could program that. And as a coach, you can look at that and go, I think it's slightly, we're going to hit this type of feel, or, this is why we're doing this. It's very subjective. And it's also, you could have one overall thing or stimulus for that workout or exercise, and then you can get very detailed. So both of you went into that, like, right away. You both identified, because you're great coaches, you want to know how many reps your top athletes will get, how many reps like your average athletes will get, like a minimum you'd want like your kind of bottom third fitness level athletes to get to. That's even getting a little bit more detailed. But I think if you pull back from that, 7 minutes of burpees, like you were saying, Todd, is really just 7 minutes of grunt work. It's really just, can you push yourself continuously hard for 7 minutes? So if you're going to try to adapt this or modify this for anybody in your class, that's like the base you have to think about is, okay, I want somebody moving for 7 minutes where no matter how tired they are, they could continue to do reps, because no matter how tired you are doing a burpee, you can still get on the ground. You can still crawl your way back up. It may not look super athletic in minute 5, or something like that, but you can continue to do it. So it's really just 7 minutes of grunt work. And if you understand that, then you can dive deeper and go, okay, how many burpees per minute we're going to get? What's our target total repetitions? You could even go deeper and say, what is a burpee? Like what are the mechanics of a burpee? It's really, you're doing a squat, you're doing a kind of quick plyometric push up, you're hinging back up. And that's why a burpee is so great to use, because you're using most of the movement patterns. Even in the disability world, we love burpees because it's getting to the ground safely, getting back up off the ground safely, which is one of the number one reasons people end up having to have secondary assistance or end up in some type of care facility, is because we don't know if they can get to the ground safely, or that if they fall, they can't get back up. And so diving a little bit deeper into stimulus, you can go as deep as you want into all those things. If you wanted to understand a different example, just really quickly in understanding stimulus, because Todd, you wanted a different one to get into, let's just analyze Fran real quick, right? 21-15-9 of thrusters and pull-ups. I think everybody knows what that feels like. Again, Todd, you brought up too, there's a psychological tolerance, the challenge of psychological tolerance in those 7 minutes of burpees, different than in Fran, because in Fran, you're pushing to almost failure at every single part of that workout, every single set. And that's why the 21-15-9 is programmed to be that way. When you use the appropriate weight in the pull-up mechanics or pull-up modification, you should be able to go unbroken, right? Or near in two sets. To get through.
I mean,
right?
just because of how much we've evolved as athletes. I don't know that was intended that way when it was first created, but yes,
sure.
Currently.
But
yes.
So talking about the stimulus of Fran, what do you think that, just big picture, what is the general stimulus that you get out of Fran? I mean, it's probably similar to the 7 minutes of burpees, but would you describe it differently?
See, once again, I always, when I'm thinking stimulus, and the way I want to describe it to my athletes is going to be, what does it look and feel like? And so, hey guys, I need this workout to be 8 minutes or less. And so how we're going to get there is roughly going to be a minute on each movement. And so I need roughly 2 sets for each set of thrusters, and probably no more than 3 sets for each set of burpee, or set of pull-ups, excuse me. Mm-hmm. I don't typically, when I'm doing a whiteboard brief or diving into workout, start talking about too much of like what we're trying to accomplish as far as physiology is concerned. It's like, hey, what are we trying to accomplish here? It's like,
I'm not saying
people, and I know that you're not asking for that, but just in general, it's like, I'm going to tell you how long I think this should be, and how do we get to that time frame by what the weight should feel like and how many sets we should do.
For sure. I completely agree. And that's a great coaching strategy too, is if you give your athletes too much information, or if you tell them how it's going to feel, then they're going to feel that. If you tell them this is going to be the worst thing you've ever felt in your life,
this is the worst workout you're ever going to do.
You're going to go to failure. You're going to want to stop. Well, immediately, if you tell somebody that, then they're going to think psychologically, oh, I'm going to go to the point where I want to stop. But if you don't tell them that, maybe they don't hit that, they can push through. So obviously this is just something more, it goes on inside your head. What you strategize about coaching and telling your athletes is completely different. So,
right.
But again, I mean, Fran's going to be fast, quick. You're going to almost fail. It's going to hurt psychologically as much as it is physically in that, because you want to stop, you want to quit. Those are big picture things that you want to apply to your adaptive athletes too, to make sure when you choose movements, you choose weights, that's going to apply to everybody in your class too. But when you look at stimulus, you can change things, you can modify things each exercise. It'll make a huge difference, right? So if you take the barbell weight of 95 and 65 pounds for the thrusters, and all of a sudden you make that 135, 95, that changes the stimulus of the workout, right? Obviously.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
That means if you keep the same rep scheme, you're going to be breaking more often. You're going to be taking more rest that's heavier, theoretically. So the average person.
Most of us, yeah.
Yes.
So the overall time span of the workout may extend as well. And it's going to elicit a slightly different stimulus because you are using different weights. Obviously, you could go the reverse side and say, let's do a barbell only Fran. I don't know if you've ever done this before, but I used to do these in Kuwait because we didn't have any bumper plates. We couldn't really steal a lot of plates. I could steal like a barbell sometimes. and I would do barbell only Fran. And I think it almost hurts my soul worse because
I would say 75 pounds is the worst version, right?
There is no reason why I may be a little bit away, just to the point where there's no reason for you ever to stop on the barbell. Is you're going even faster and you want to manipulate it faster even than gravity can pull you down. So that has a different stimulus too. You can just see each component. If you just change something about it, it'll change the stimulus of that exercise and the workout as a whole. You could change the barbell. I remember I did Fran at my level 1. It was in Switzerland at the time. I took leave to go to Switzerland. They didn't have barbells. They only had kettlebells. And I was quickly humbled because I'd never trained that way before. And I think I did the 44-pound kettlebells.
Wait, you did double kettlebell thrusters?
Yes.
Yeah. That sounds so horrible.
Yep, at my level 1.
Yeah.
And I was down for the count after that because I'd never done that before. I'd never done, something in each hand. I'd always done a connected barbell between the two.
Sure.
And obviously I wasn't prepared for that. That changes the stimulus of that exercise and workout. So you can understand, you can get deeper and deeper into stimulus. You can get it. If you can nerd out and go into, is it, eccentric or is it concentric? Is it isometric movement? That is not you can overwhelm yourself with the amount of stuff you can go into stimulus, but just to keep it simple, really, you just want to pull apart some of the things that the level 1 teaches you, level 2 teaches you to understand better. The more you understand about the stimulus, the better you can replicate that for all of your athletes in your class. So
yeah, I love that. And I would imagine that may be a step that people miss when it comes to what the best scales are that we can offer, because oftentimes people will go right to like, okay, what's the scale for this movement? And if you ask them, well, what's the stimulus? What are we trying to do? And really quick, Alec, I just want to have you give us an overview and understanding when we're talking about adaptive athletes versus injured athletes, or adaptive versus just typical scaling. Can you just revisit that? I know we talked about that on the last time you were here.
Yeah, just understanding who adaptive athletes are.
Yeah, just the difference between like, hey, you have an injured athlete versus you have an adaptive athlete, and how we're approaching it slightly different, right?
Yeah, the big difference between somebody who has a permanent impairment versus an injury is with the injured athlete, you would expect them to regain most function. So typically you're just going to be training around that lack of function. So if somebody has a ACL injury, knee injury, ankle injury, well, they can become a seated athlete for the next 2 months or whenever they're recovering. They can work on all kinds of upper body things. They can still train their other leg as much as they can. And you're going to just kind of work around that injury versus an adaptive athlete. We're trying to utilize as much of their body as all of the time. So you're trying to use as much as you can and train all of the body versus avoiding a side in an injury. Okay. You don't even need to know that as a coach necessarily. I mean, you should understand this to some degree, but the same ways you can adapt for adaptive athletes, you can make modifications for anybody in your gym, whether injured or you just need to make modifications in general. Okay. And so the way we go about doing that and what we teach from Adaptive Training Academy is we have these mental frameworks that help you adapt. They help you go down a path of, how do I want to think about this movement and how can I then change or alter an exercise to replicate that stimulus? And so there's 4 adapting methods. There's movement pattern, which you identify the main movement pattern that you're using and try to replicate that as much as possible just by altering some part of the equipment or setup, whatever you can do for the exercise. It's what everybody does all the time. And if you're watching this, they're on the screen now, but we'll talk through them too. The 4 are movement pattern, task accomplishment, functional movement themes, and specific stimulus. For that first one, for movement pattern, all the CrossFit trainers are going to be aware of this because this is what you do for scaling. All you do is identify, okay, this movement is a pull-up. A pull-up is an upper body pulling movement. I want to keep it an upper body pulling movement. Let's just find some way for everybody in class to do an upper body pulling movement. So somebody who's new to your gym, they can't do a single strict pull-up. You're not going to kick them out when Fran comes in and you have 21, 15, 9 pull-ups. Right? They're going to do something in your gym. They're going to do some modification of, kneeling pull-ups, some type of band assist pull-up, jumping pull-up, any way that can still do a upper body pull. So you're keeping it an upper body pull. It's that simple. It's what you do for scaling all the time. you can use that same method for adaptive athletes. The other three methods.
Really quick, Alec, we had because we brought up the burpee and we're talking about the burpee, some question from Vicente, go-to modification for the burpee for a wheelchair athlete, which I know that these 4 methods is the way that we work ourselves to that. So I'd love if you'd throw the burpee in there periodically, just as one of your examples.
Most definitely. We can do that right now. So for movement pattern, if you can replicate the movement pattern, you're gonna try to replicate that movement pattern as much as possible. But sometimes the athlete can't do that movement pattern, right? So that's where the second one comes in, the second method, which is task accomplishment. In this mental framework, you're starting with, here's an exercise. I want to see if I can replicate the task that is accomplished with it, the functionality of that movement as much as possible. I don't care if the same major joints, muscle groups do the work. All I care about is how they accomplish that task. So an easy example would be a deadlift for a spinal cord injury athlete, a wheelchair athlete that cannot use their legs and hips to stand. So in that training scenario, it's the deadlift. Let's say we're just doing deadlift for strength. So we're doing sets and reps with rest periods in between. All we care about in that case, thinking about the deadlift, is just picking something up and putting it down. That's what we're training for the functionality of real life. So can you create an exercise where a seated athlete that can't use their hips as a movement or as a motor pattern, can you replicate that in a seated position? And the answer is yes. You just have to be creative and think about it and work with your athlete. But as long as they can get something from the ground to their lap level, then they're still replicating that task accomplishment. So it could be just doing a side bend deadlift, just picking something up from the side of their chair, putting it there. It could be just doing side bends. So they're holding onto their chair and they're just literally doing side bends with some weight, is lifting a load up and down. It could be going from one side of the chair to the lap to the other side. Or if they're a little bit more advanced, they can be doing something where they're bilaterally picking something up from the front of their chair with some training. So in that case, all we're doing is thinking about the task that is accomplished, the actual functionality of that movement. So the burpees in this case, if you're thinking about the burpee, not in the case of movement pattern where it's a squat, it's kind of a hinge, a push-up all combined. You're thinking literally just burpee is getting to the ground and getting back up. Then for a seated athlete, you can do any movement where they're just changing their body mass from a higher position to a lower position and getting from one surface to another. So it could be doing something like transfers. You could be transferring from a low box to the ground to a padded position, because a seated athlete's going to be using their shoulders and arms to raise and lower their body mass. So that could be used. You could use something like a dip. You could just do a push-up. You can just use parts of the burpee, of the getting themselves off the ground. But what you have to be conscious of is, am I doing this for 7 minutes? Because I have to be able to replicate something for 7 minutes. So then that goes into your choices for how can my seated athlete do their version of a burpee for 7 minutes. Sometimes you'll see
back to the stimulus that we determined already, right? It should be something they can do for the full 7 minutes, might be a little mentally challenging, but is physically doable.
Yeah,
exactly.
So in that scenario, something like the push-ups probably not a good option, because we all know that our push-ups are going to fall apart, right? We're going to run out of push-ups at some point in 7 minutes of doing push-ups. So I like the idea of, like, what did you call them? Like getting on the ground and onto transfers.
Yeah, transfers.
Could something like a ball slam or a plate ground overhead, is that something that's similar there too, where you're moving through it? The body's not going down and coming back up, but they're still moving an object through a range of motion that's pretty
so
that's
a
burpee would, or not really.
Yeah, you will see athletes doing a ball slam or moving an external object the same distance that you would sort of move your body in that case. That doesn't necessarily fall under the task accomplishment method, because now that's not the same task accomplishment for a burpee. But you are right, Todd. That's where that can come into play. So that's more in the specific stimulus, and I'll bring that back up when we get there. Let me talk. So for just a review for task accomplishment, as a coach, all you're thinking about is, does this have some type of functionality in the real world? It doesn't have to be like, I'm carrying groceries, so therefore I have to carry kettlebells like an exact 1-to-1. But does it have some type of replication to activities of daily living, things you do in the real world, then just think about that movement that way and try to alter it for your adaptive athletes that way. I think most coaches, everybody would be a little bit more fit, probably move more safely if we thought about more task accomplishment than pure just movement pattern or these other things, and especially for your adaptive athletes. The third method is functional movement themes. This one's a little bit more into the theory, but it really helps you kind of catch all, because as much as we like to say that everything we do in the CrossFit gym is functional, not saying it's not functional, it doesn't have some type of carryover, but there are specific movements we do that you don't regularly see all the time in the real world. So something like an overhead squat. If we were to try to apply an overhead squat to a seated athlete with a spinal cord injury, if we go back through our methods, first we start with the movement pattern. It's a squat. You're holding something overhead while you squat, but that athlete's not going to be able to hold something overhead. They're not going to be able to squat because they can't stand and use their legs and hips. Task accomplishment. There's not really a one-to-one task accomplishment for an overhead squat. Like it's holding something while you're squatting. You can look at it that way. That's fine. But functional movement themes are there so they can help you find some way to adapt that movement. So the main functional movement themes you would learn in your level 1, level 2 is midline stability, core to extremity movement pattern, using an active shoulder, primarily using posterior chain engagement, and then moving about a full range of motion for that joint. So if you use those main 5, and if you have more that you want to use, like moving in the frontal plane or bar path, things like that, you can apply those too. That's perfectly fine. But if you use this method, let's say overhead squats for a seated athlete with a spinal cord injury, how would you adapt an overhead squat for a spinal cord injury athlete? And I'll give you an example, a real world. They used to work out Nancy. So say 5 rounds, you're going to do 15 overhead squats and you run 400 meters. Think about if you had a spinal cord injury, or anybody who doesn't have the full use of their legs and hips, that one is going to have difficulty running, 2 is going to need to adapt that overhead squat. So again, you're like, oh, well, how do I even think about adapting this? Well, use this functional movement themes framework. You say, what 1 or 2 functional movement themes are being challenged in the overhead squat? So what do you guys think for overhead squat? What is most being challenged in the overhead squat from those functional movement themes?
Midline stability, active shoulder, the 2.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I would agree 100%. Now it's very subjective, so you could say something else,
right?
Whatever you want. But in the overhead squat, in that workout specifically, when you're doing 5 rounds, you're doing 15 overhead squats, and you're doing a moderate load, so you should be able to do those almost unbroken or in 2 sets. Then the challenge is holding the load overhead. Like typically, your legs aren't going to give out. Yes, you're running, and they will fatigue. But it's the midline stability because you're holding something overhead, and it's the active shoulder of holding something overhead while you're squatting. That's really the challenge and the stimulus of that exercise in that workout. So knowing that, now we can adapt and create a new exercise for any of our athletes. But for that wheelchair user, how could we create an active shoulder and midline stability challenge that will replicate the overhead squat in that class? We'll do a little bit deeper dive and understand how long will that overhead squat take somebody to do each round. They're probably working for about 30 seconds, but there's maybe you could say 30 to 45 seconds worth of effort. So can you create a new exercise that takes about 30 to 45 seconds, challenging midline stability and active shoulder? The answer is yes. You can just be as creative as you want, for sure. But you could just simply holding a barbell in their wheelchair overhead for 45 seconds. As boring as that sounds, it will replicate the same stimulus that everybody else is getting in the class. Now they're not squatting, but they don't have the ability to do the squat function. So maybe we're just focusing on the active shoulder and midline stability. You can get as creative as you want and just come up with all kinds of challenges that could replicate that.
Right. And even though they're not squatting, we've already talked about that's okay because those aren't the main movement themes that particular piece of the workout is going for. Yeah, go ahead.
And I really like that too, because it allows the variety I think necessary. I think it's really easy to look at, especially if you've got a seated athlete. It's like, all right, they can use their arms. We're going to push or we're going to pull every single day. And all of a sudden, clearly that's going to become redundant. And if they're coming to the gym 5 days a week, we can't push and pull, in different planes every single day. So now all of a sudden to turn it into a 45-second hold overhead is not only does it match the stimulus of the workout, but it provides some variety, and it's going to help them from overdoing it on the pushing and pulling. And so I like, to your point, like more creativity, the better off we're going to be. And the more we can look at what this is going to look and feel like and try to provide different options day after day, I'm sure is going to be more valuable as they continue to train with us.
And static holds, even though, like you said, Alex, it's like not the most exciting thing, they're really hard. Like I would rather do 15 overhead squats than hold it for 45 seconds. So there's some value there for sure.
It's gonna stabilize and work on the things necessary so they can push and pull a whole bunch, which they're going to do anyways, right? So this is like essentially the accessory work that's needed for them to stay functional and not get overtrained anyways. It's such a good fit.
And you also need to be aware, those are all great points. Be aware that in that workout, when you're running and doing overhead squats, you can adapt the overhead squat part, and you could come up with a great either scale or modification or adaptation, but you also have to consider that they're running too. So you can't just do it in isolation and not think about the other elements of that workout. So that seated athlete is going to have to run as well. So if they can't run, they're going to have to use their arms to do some type of 90 seconds to 2 minutes of some type of conditioning. I mean, this is where now, if you wanted to pick apart the run, like where does the run fall in for that seated athlete, right? The movement pattern would be, doing a run movement pattern, we call locomotion, getting your body across space. So you could say, hey, I just want to know that they can push their wheelchair a certain distance in 90-ish seconds. That's fine, but it may not be the best for your gym setting and maybe snowing outside. You don't know. Task accomplishment is just getting your body across space. But you also could think, okay, fatigue wise, I don't want to do something where the overhead squat adaptation is going to fatigue them so much that now they don't have a chance to do the run and hit that same stimulus. Because for a standing able-bodied athlete, the nice part of this couplet is you have the squat, which is mainly a shoulder midline stability test. And then you go into the run, which is you kind of get a reprieve from your shoulders and arms, and you can just run. I know when I do that workout, like later in the rounds, I'm like shaking my arms out as I run because I'm trying to loosen them up and get some blood flow and get ready to do that active shoulder challenge again. You have to consider that when you're thinking about your seated athlete for sure. And Todd, you put up a great point, which is the number one thing we teach for adaptive trainers for their adaptive athletes is to keep them safe, is to think about not doing some type of overtraining where it's the same replicated movement pattern day and day. The real challenge and the safety issue for seated athletes is that if you program for a week of standing able-bodied athletes and you adapt it for a seated athlete, inevitably it's going to become going from, an upper body standing athlete's going to have some leg function day, some hip function day, and that's all going to be changed to arms and shoulders for your seated athlete. So there is a potential danger of having too many replicated movement patterns for your seated athlete because it wasn't programmed that way from your programmer to have that stimulus. But when you adapt, and if you just look in that single day, like it may be great. But if you look like, oh, yesterday we did a ton of dips, and like today the adaptation may be dips, but we just did that yesterday, or we just did a ton of push-ups, and it's like, you have to be really creative for your seated athletes, the ones that have less function of, let's say, lower extremities for sure. So
now the last method that you have up here is the specific stimulus. So how does that wrap everything up?
This is sort of a catch-all where sometimes you can put an exercise through these other frameworks, the movement pattern, or it doesn't have a great task accomplishment associated with it, or even the functional movement themes aren't specifically like highlighted. You're like, I can't, it's not a great way to think about this. So the specific stimulus, if you're not seeing this on the screen, is the 10 general physical skills. That's what's listed, along with 3 extra ones that we've added that we think are highly trained in a lot of different exercises and workouts. Those 3 extra at the bottom are task accomplishment. And that's just specifically being able to understand that there is a step-by-step process of how to do an exercise and a movement. So we take for granted a lot of our able-bodied athletes are, it's a complicated process to do a deadlift, even to know where to put your feet, know where to put your hands are on the barbell, how to arrange your body, what sequence you move your body to be able to do that. That's a lot of work, cognitive work and physical work. So that's what task accomplishment is. Psychological tolerance, we understand what that is. And then psychosocial skills is on that list as well, which is just being in an environment with other people, other stimulus. And that's there because that's mainly for our athletes that have some type of overstimulus. So all athletes with autism or some type of other cognition or intellectual disability. Sometimes the benefit of the workout is really just being in a space with other people, taking directions from somebody who's not their primary caretaker or somebody they're not used to all the time. So those three are added to our list for our adaptive athletes. But what we do for the specific stimulus is just take an exercise and think, okay, what is out of that 10, those 10 physical skills, what am I training mostly? What is being trained in this case? And can I just replicate that in some way? It doesn't even have to have the same look to it whatsoever, but it is going to replicate some of those 10 general physical skills. So for instance, your example would be jump rope. So the jump rope movement pattern, you could say it's a mini jump, but it kind of falls short of like a full squat. That is not really a task accomplishment. You don't see people like out in the real world doing jump rope. But that doesn't mean anything we do in the gym has to have a one-to-one correlate to something out in the real world. It doesn't need to be that way. Obviously, you get a lot from training jump rope. Functional movement themes, if you put the jump rope through, it kind of falls short there. That's where specific stimulus can be a catch-all for you. So why do you do jump rope in a workout? If you want to use a specific example, use Annie. So 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, double unders, and sit-ups. If you're thinking about adapting that or modifying it for somebody that's in your gym, how do you think about that jump rope? Like, what is the stimulus of that jump rope? And that's where the specific stimulus list comes in play, the 10 general physical skills. So out of those 10 general physical skills, which one of those or two are being used most in a double under? Would you choose, say? Obviously, there's no wrong answer here, but there's some that lean more towards
there's some coordination, accuracy, and then I would say in
cardiorespiratory endurance.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays the 50, 40, 30, 20, 10 is such a small number. It doesn't have the same amount of endurance impact that it did, 15 years ago, but yeah.
Sure. Okay, we'll double it. Let's just say you double those reps. It doesn't matter what it is. Right. I think you hit on the right thing. So if you look at the jump rope, you always have some cardiovascular endurance, and that's your oxygen systems, your stamina, your energy systems going. So that's really the challenge, is that the high level of that, but you mix that with a high level of coordination. So the challenge of the jump rope is you're fatiguing yourself, you're breathing heavy, but you're also having to cognitively do something with coordination while you do that exercise. So using that framework, can you create a new exercise with that stimulus for any athlete in your gym? The answer is yes. You just have to be creative about it. So for an athlete like a wheelchair user that's not going to be doing a standing jump rope, can you find some way to challenge their endurance, stamina, and some type of coordination if you wanted to hit that? Yeah, yes, for sure. You could. There's all kinds of things, different ways you could do that. Even just doing a ski erg where you're doing a different movement pattern, and maybe not bilateral ski, maybe you're doing individual sides. It's a slight difference in coordination. It's not a high level like you get with jump rope, but at least it's something different. I don't think we do. You don't do battle ropes a lot in CrossFit gyms. This would be a great day for something like that, because there is a high level of coordination, endurance, and stamina for a seated athlete, or anybody who's injured that just needs to sit and do a good workout. That could be used as well. I mean, I've seen all kinds of things used for the jump rope. There are specialty pieces of equipment. So there are multi-ropes that are split, shorter jump ropes that athletes can turn and go to their sides. If you have I would recommend every gym get a pair of those, because everybody can use those. There's inevitably somebody who's not going to be able to jump. And if you've never tried those, they absolutely destroy your shoulders. And they get you breathing heavy, which is the whole idea. But that's what you do for specific stimulus, is you're going to use that list and then say, hey, I want to try to replicate the intense stimulus of endurance, stamina, or it could be, hey, it's a power and speed movement. I want to replicate power and speed. So that's what I'm trying to hit. And I'm going to create some new exercise that replicates power and speed in there.
Yeah. And this is such a great, it's so great to just call back to this list. And especially if you find yourself a little bit stagnant with your scaling options. I know I've fallen in this trap many times where it's like, oh, okay, double unders, here's the scale. Like go jump on the Echo bike, do this many calories, get on a ski or do this many. But to go through this and really thoughtfully, like, okay, I also want to challenge coordination. How can I do that? I want a little neurological aspect in here. So just as simple as taking the ski erg and doing like one arm at a time, like just changing it up a little bit is really great. And with your, let me go back to this real quick. I'll put this on the screen. With these 4 pillars, these 4 methods, they're in order, right? Like you're kind of going in order, step 1, step 2, step 3.
That's primary how it's used. Is you typically can stick, if you can replicate the movement pattern, that's probably the best stimulus you're going to get, is just keeping that same movement pattern, but altering some aspect about it. It could change a barbell to a single kettlebell or a sandbag. If somebody is doing a front squat and they can't get to that front rack position because they only have one arm, or they have a brachial plexus injury and they can't get a front rack position for whatever reason, we can still replicate a squat by using a sandbag or a kettlebell or a dumbbell in the front of the frontal plane. So yes, you start there and then you can kind of work your way across, but it doesn't have to be that way. If you're like, hey, I'm thinking about it this way. I'm thinking about the functional movement themes of, oh, I know a wall ball shot is extreme. That's where you're doing quarter extremity movement pattern. Like we are hitting that hard. So I'm going to come up with some other way to replicate the stimulus of this exercise for this athlete with this condition, focusing on quarter extremity movement pattern. I don't care about maybe even keeping the same rep scheme. I'm going to alter the rep scheme or the load or something, but I'm keeping quarter extremity movement pattern. So yeah, it typically goes in that order across from in that fashion, but you don't have to use it in that way. That's just the primary way it's kind of most often used.
Yeah, I love it.
So I like the concept, and now all my brain can think about is, all right, I need more specific examples.
Yep.
So in of course, like the seated athlete is the one I think is the most challenging, because the list of exercises seem more limited. So you mentioned quarter extremity movement. Give me an example. What would be a quarter extremity movement on a wall ball shot day for a seated athlete that you like? Give me 3 options.
For that specifically, you think, well, for the seated athlete, if they're not using their hips, let's say they don't have the motor function of their hips and legs, then their quarter extremity changes just from the most they could probably get is some thoracic spine flexion extension and throwing. Okay. So you could turn that into a med ball sit-up toss. So they can sit next to the wall, and now they're using the energy, the weight of the medicine ball to actually help them sit up. So less than a challenge of sitting up like against the medicine ball weight. They're actually using that to throw themselves forward, which they're using as much of their thoracic flexion extension and then using their arms. So as much of their quarter extremity you could use. So then they would sit up and either tap the wall, or maybe there's just a short toss to the wall. But that's a way you can still keep it quarter extremity, even though you aren't using a traditional, hips and then radiating out to your extremities type of movement pattern.
And even choosing the specific movement, you're going to take into account, again, jumping back or working back from, let's figure out the stimulus first. It's going to depend on how long we're going to be on the wall ball, what other movements we're doing with that workout, how long it takes. For example, with this, they're getting out of their chair and getting back into their chair for that portion of the workout, right? So we have to consider how long that's going to take. Do they need assistance with that?
You can go on forever about thinking it through. And I don't want to scare off coaches and think, oh my gosh, I won't be able to do this. I can say that if you are already coaching people in your gym and you're a thoughtful coach, especially if you're watching this, if you're in the best hour of the day program, just trying to get better, you're going to be able to work with people with disabilities. You're going to be able to work with everybody because you're thoughtful. You're thinking about it. That's all it takes, is just being thoughtful about it and asking questions and figuring it out. So everybody can do this. Don't think that you can't do it. You get better with repetitions, just like any coaching happens. But you can do it. And these frameworks are just there to help you do that. The more education and times you go through it, the better you will be, for sure.
And we talked a little bit on the last call, or the last time that we had you on, about one of your best tools is to simply talk to the athlete, right? To just ask questions. What do you normally do? What are you comfortable with?
That's right. You could come up with, just with anybody, you could come up with a great modification for everybody in your class, or even as a programmer, you come up with a great workout and it may completely miss. So the first thing you should do is talk to your athlete and see, do they have something that they regularly do when wall ball shots come into play? Or do they have something that they go to or typically do for an overhead squat? That may give you the starting point where they say, okay, for overhead squat, every time we do overhead squat, I'm a wheelchair user. I just sit in my wheelchair and I hold a barbell overhead. And you're like, okay, that's good. But can we add some variety to this? So yeah, maybe we, instead of just holding overhead, we have some kettlebells with bands attached to them, so it's even more unstable and it applies more midline stability and active shoulder demand. Or you can use that as a starting point. So yes, please talk to your athletes and ask them, have you done this before? What do you feel comfortable doing? And then say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. This is what it'll feel like in the workout. Do you think you can get that many reps? Or what? Like, oh, okay, yeah. It's the same thing you would do for anybody else. You just have to be a little bit more thoughtful, because that adaptive athlete is going to have some underlying health condition that may alter their abilities or may change the way that stimulus is applied to them. And I think there's another aspect to, Todd, you said, like, most of the examples we use are spinal cord injury, somebody where they're not using the motor function of the legs and hips, because it's a very obvious example. But there are other ways to think about this too, in that, let's say you're doing the 150 wall balls for time. So, which is my favorite workout.
Is it?
Oh my gosh,
yeah, it is.
That is the complete opposite for me.
I don't mind that workout. I'd rather do that than 7 minutes of burpees.
Yeah,
so I'm with you on that, Alec.
I'm a slightly taller athlete, which doesn't help with the squat aspect, but that target's a lot closer.
Yeah.
A lot closer.
No, thanks.
But let's say you're doing 150 wall ball shots for time, and your athlete is an upper extremity athlete where they don't have the functionality of both their arms to throw that ball, or they don't have the stability to be able to hold a medicine ball, toss it, and catch it. So in that case, it may be as simple as bringing that down to like something like a thruster, and they're just using a single implement like a kettlebell or a dumbbell, and they're doing those repetitions, and they're going to finish sooner because there's not the aspect of throwing something, waiting for it, catching it, and going down. But what you have to think about then is, okay, I've challenged only one side of their body as far as their pressing. And let's say they're above elbow athletes, so they couldn't use that arm. They didn't use any of their one shoulder, the whole side for stability. So this is when you have to use some type of accessory movement or after workout. Because if you're thinking about the stimulus of 150 wall ball shots is high intensity, you're pushing yourself, it's a lot of psychological tolerance, you're going as much as you can. After the workout, you have to work on that either underutilized side or untrained side of the body to get some type of that replicated stimulus. So I'm not saying afterwards that athlete's going to take, let's say, a band to their shoulder and doing pressing with the band underneath their foot. They're not going to do maybe 150 reps at that same intensity, but they're going to do some type of work on that shoulder, on the underutilized and untrained side, to keep the training stimulus as symmetrical as possible for that athlete. So there's some deeper thought to it as well.
Would you ever incorporate that into the workout?
You could. I mean, obviously the answer is you could. It is as much what goes back to is, what is your intended stimulus? If your intended stimulus is, you are moving to almost failure at every time you go through a set, then maybe breaking and putting on a band and doing some band work is going to break up that stimulus and not get you that same stimulus. So that's why it's okay. I think sometimes CrossFit trainers are a little bit fearful to do like supplemental, accessory work and not get it into the main meat and potatoes of the workout. But for adaptive athletes, doing some accessory work and some work after the high intensity part is vital to make sure we can still train all the parts of the athlete, be symmetrical, and not go a day where I've only used my right arm for 3 days straight. I did nothing on this side because everything was so high intensity. That's when you have to hit some supplemental accessory work.
I guess I was thinking just along the lines of, if their workout's going to take them half the time as the rest of the class.
Well,
Like,
that's
is
what,
there a way? Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
you're
sure.
saying it's gonna be shorter, right? Because they don't have to throw the ball, and so maybe it even turns into 100 reps of each, and it probably hits the stimulus of the time frame being similar, of like 100 on one side, and then you transition and grab the band and do it on the other side and do 100 reps of that. And like, to your point, just that awareness and being like, all right, I need to add this to the equation. So do we do that in accessory afterwards if we have time, or do I figure out how to mix it in, but do it in a way to where we still maintain what we want to accomplish in the stimulus? So creativity and thinking through this stuff is always going to be our friend, and more importantly, the preparation. Like, we talk about doing your lesson plan, and it's not just for the timestamps of how long each section is going to take and what you're going to do, but it's like, hey, thinking through, how do we scale this workout, not only for our athletes that are able-bodied, that we still need to scale load or reps or any of that kind of stuff, but to your point, you never know who you're going to train on a given day. So somebody walks in or rolls in or shows up that you didn't expect. Make sure you've thought through that at least a little bit. I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah. And just talking to them too. I know we talked about, hey, how do you normally scale this, and letting them kind of guide those answers. But to your point before, we were talking about, hey, maybe they did a bunch of dips the day before as their scale, and then today is dips for the workout. I would imagine, like, my go-to, and tell me if there's a better way to do this, is just like, hey, I know you did dips yesterday. We've got some more shoulder. How are you feeling? Like tell me about, are you sore? What's going on? How's everything feeling? And then having that help guide perhaps what I'm going to offer to them, or what I'm going to help figure out, so that we're not overusing certain body parts, creating injuries unnecessarily. What are your thoughts on that, Alec? Just as far as, like, I have a plan. It's a lot of redundancy from what happened the day before. Am I going to let them guide a little bit of what we're going to end up doing based on how they feel?
I think the best thing any trainer can do is empower their adaptive athletes in their gym, because you don't want the adaptive athlete to be stuck with one coach, and like, your one coach is the only coach that knows how to work with that athlete, and they can only go at that one time. You want to empower your adaptive athletes so they understand as much of, you want to let them into your head, understand what you're thinking, so that they already have some ways they can do movements. So if your adaptive athlete comes into the gym and they already know, hey, when there's pull-ups, I'm an upper extremity athlete and I can't do bilateral pull-ups, but when I see pull-ups in a workout, I have 3 go-tos that I can choose from. And maybe this one style is better than another style, depending on if it's high rep or low rep, or what the stimulus may be in the workout. So the more that you can talk to your athletes and give them the tools to understand what they're going to do, then even better. Because if Kristin, if you have an athlete that you've trained, you've taken through foundations, you understand how they move and their condition, but then they want to go to an evening class and you only coach morning classes, you want to give them as much tools as possible so that they can start working with those evening coaches and go through it. So the more empowerment you give the athlete, the better. And as coaches, use those mental frameworks, those adapting methods, because it's really easy to start just thinking, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to do. Just go back to those frameworks and think, can I replicate the movement pattern? Can I replicate the specific task accomplished? Is it just picking something up and putting it down? Is it putting something over my head? Then you go into the functional movement themes of the movement. Can I pick something out of there? If not, then is there something from the general physical skills? What are the aspects of that are being utilized, and pull those out? That's how you use that. So you're not just kind of like pulling stuff out of the air and you get lost not knowing what to do.
Yeah, I love it. The frameworks are super helpful for sure. Just to give a little bit of guide there. And tell us a little bit about, I know you have a ton of courses with the Adaptive Fitness or the Adaptive Training Academy, excuse me. Tell us a little bit about what people can learn from you guys and what you're offering.
So with our Adaptive Inclusive Trainer course, we created this course back in 2017, and it was the original CrossFit specialty course, adaptive training. So we really does have the bones, and it still does, of functional movements, and it really does come from the CrossFit world originally. But what you will learn is what we talked about today. We'll just go into greater detail, and we'll actually use more examples. We'll give you more examples, more athletes to go through and work through in that case. to make sure you can really understand how to use those mental frameworks for adapting. But it covers all your athlete spectrum. So we're not just talking about physiological impairments, but also cognitive, intellectual disabilities. Because one aspect of that list, the 10 general physical skills that we added, were the psychosocial skills. And sometimes if you have an athlete that has difficulty being in a very stimulus-rich environment, sometimes it's just the stimulus of that workout for the day may just be being in that environment. I don't really care as much about them hitting the reps they needed to hit or whatever it is. It's just being in that environment and being able to tolerate that's the stimulus of the day. And that could be it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I know we're getting close to time, but I think the other workout that we use a lot because it's so extreme as an example for adapting, because then it starts to blow your mind, is Murph. Because, right, so if you start thinking about Murph, which is a mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 air squats, a mile run, and you start to apply some athlete examples, some avatars of athletes would be, again, your spinal cord injury wheelchair user. Think about that, because now they're doing a mile potentially in their wheelchair. They got to do 100 pull-ups. They're maybe not using any of the kipping action or as much of the kipping action. They then have 200 push-ups and then 300 squats. So this is a good example where if you isolate each exercise and you adapt each exercise in isolation, it's not going to work out. Because if you say, what is a standing able-bodied athlete is going to have some reprieve from upper body to lower body in that meet in the middle of those exercises, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 air squats. But an athlete who doesn't have the use of their hips and legs is only using their arms and shoulders. So you have to be really thoughtful in adapting those exercises. And this is where you have to be really creative, because you could adapt the pull-ups for sure. You could figure out they could do probably less repetitions, or if they're really conditioned, they could do 100 pull-ups. They can maybe do the 200 push-ups, but they're not going to be able to do something that replicates 300 air squats. Like an air squat, if you go back to the frameworks, a squat is, you're just moving your body mass up and down. That's a task accomplishment with it. So can you replicate that? The best correlate would be dips, because that's moving your body mass up and down a long distance. But you're not going to do 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, and 300 dips.
Come on, let's go.
Good luck.
So I see for the spinal cord injury athlete, the wheelchair users, for the squats, you usually get really creative. Like I know, I think Kevin's version is doing something like a med ball twist.
Okay.
And people can get very creative and doing something different in that 300, because it's 300 first off.
Right.
And so you have to be creative and not put them in jeopardy. But I bring up this workout too, just to highlight that an aspect of Murph, typically that workout is done, in celebration. It's done with your entire gym environment. All of your community is doing it together. So where an athlete, maybe they don't typically do a mile push in their wheelchair because maybe your outside conditions aren't the best. There's screws and glass and uneven surfaces out in the real world that a wheelchair may have to, go up against. This is a time when, and you may typically put them on, arms only air bike or a ski or some other version of conditioning to replicate that stimulus. But in this case, you have everybody going out the gym door, 3, 2, 1, go. Everybody goes together. This is a time when your seated athlete and a wheelchair user may actually go push a distance with everybody, because the community aspect is so much a part of that stimulus of the day. And you have to try to replicate that. So there's other times when you're thinking, okay, I want them to be a part of the class. I want them to be a part of the community. I'm going to make sure that is part of the stimulus. Being together and doing this work together is a highlight of that stimulus.
I love that. Even being mindful, I think we talked a little bit about this last time, but being mindful of where you place the equipment. If they're going to do a row or if they're going to do a ski, we move the equipment over by the entranceway and they're right there with everybody, or just all the different tiny things that maybe we don't think of off the top of our head, but can ultimately be pretty impactful with what the overall vibe of the workout is that we want to see.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was awesome, Alec. Thank you so much for being here. You mentioned for your courses, you go into this in so much more detail and you give a lot of examples. And for me personally, hearing the examples that is what connects everything together. Like I can see the different methods and we can talk through the theory of it all. But when I start picturing athletes like that you're explaining and I start imagining the movements, then it becomes so much easier for me to start thinking of ways that I could come up with things that meet, like, okay, well, what's the stimulus? What's the purpose of this movement? What are the movement themes that we're trying to cover? So this is really, really fantastic. We'll put your website in the chat. So where else can everybody find you to find out more about all this?
Yeah, we're really active on Instagram. Our handle is Adaptive Training. Go follow there so you can follow along and see other athlete examples, other coaching examples. And I do just want to say right now that, and I put this out to the community, that we have a grant through the Veterans Administration. So if there's anybody looking as a coach to take the course, this grant provides scholarships to take the course, either online or in person. That grant window is only open until the end of March. So if you go to the website, there's a tab for grants. You can apply for a scholarship. So it will help you be able to pay for this type of training to get a little bit deeper. So that awesome. Our goal is that every affiliate have at least one coach that has gone through the training so that they can pass that knowledge off to other people. And so that adaptive athletes have more places where they feel they can go to and train safely and effectively. We need to get more adaptive athletes into gyms, like we talked about last time, so that because representation definitely matters. The more people that we see of ourselves training in that facility, the more you'll see athletes going in. So having more wheelchair users or amputees and people with neurological conditions, they'll start coming into your facility if you have somebody. So starts with the education. Get your education, get your knowledge, get your certificate. It's worth CEUs as well. So, but yeah, if you can apply for that scholarship. We also have funds coming available to help gyms start programs that'll help you pay for coaching, and then also adaptive equipment. So we mentioned it's a little bit about the multi ropes, the jump ropes. Mm-hmm. So there's some grip aids. There's some other safety devices that every gym should have, or adaptive equipment they could get, like a lifting harness or a lap mat for their seated athletes. Our grant will allow you to pay for some of that equipment as well. So that's coming up as well. You can see that on our website.
That's super cool. Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. Well, thank you, Alex, so much again for being here. Everybody check out the website, the URL there, find out all the information about the grant and everything. And if you are here listening to this after the fact, if you're not with us live, we will be live. We're live every Thursday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And Jay and Fern also on Tuesdays at 11 Eastern Standard Time. Jump on there, jump in the comments, ask us questions. And if you want to hang out with us more, Affiliate Con is coming October 16th to 18th in Dallas. I know Alec was there, the first inaugural Affiliate Con. It was a ton of fun. We can't wait to do it again. It's going to be even bigger and better. Tickets open on Monday. So put something, put a little alert on your calendar there. And besthouroftheirday.com if you are interested in joining us even more, jumping on some coaching calls with us, getting reviews of your coaching, go to besthouroftheirday.com. We've got a 14-day free trial for the Knowledge Pro. So jump it there, see what you think, and just keep getting better. So we'll see you next week, same time, same place. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Alec.
Yep. Thanks, Alec.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for checking out this episode of the Best Hour of Their Day podcast. Now, if you're a coach who wants to coach more effectively, impact your members, and advance your career, then the Knowledge Pro is the next step. Inside, you'll get hundreds of coaching videos, weekly calls with level 4 coaches, and direct feedback on your coaching. From homework reviews to full class breakdowns, we do it all. This is the best way to grow as a coach and take your skills to the next level. Now you can join the Knowledge Pro at besthouroftheirday.com/the-knowledge. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. Now keep coaching, keep improving, and we'll see you next time.